Hi, FCA teammates. Roger Lipe here with Saluki FCA up in Southern Illinois. It's great to meet with you today. I'd like to continue our talk about the ministry of presence and how important that is and how it sets the table for everything else that we do. As a rule of thumb, I would say presence is the bedrock thing that helps, is the platform from which we build relationships, which is really the key to the whole ministry. There are two places in particular we want to talk about presence today. One of them is at practices and one of them is on game day. I would tell you, related to practices, that the more inconvenient and the more uncomfortable the place is, that's the best place to be. On any given day, our presence at practice communicates commitment. They know everybody goes to games, big deal. Who comes to practice? Only the people who have to. When we show up at practice, we communicate commitment just by showing up. They notice who's there. They see that. They know there's no big crowd. Who's that guy? And word gets around, and pretty soon they know who we are. Especially if we walk around and carry a water bottle, we do something else to get something in front of people. Staying out of the way, but in a strategic place, is really, really wise. And so we'll talk about presence at practices and on game day. One of those things to think about, especially on practices, is know your boundaries. It's wise to ask the coaching staff, please tell me some boundaries. Where should I go? Where should I not go? So that I do serve you best, but not in the way. And they'll tell you. If you understand the game already, you know where those things are. There's certain places on a basketball floor, don't walk out onto the floor unless you're invited. Stay over there, but do stand by the water. They're going to come drink water in a minute, so be there. You're available, but you're not in the way. Similarly, with football, you don't walk through the middle of drills. On a baseball field, there are particular places you should go and a bunch of places you should never go. Ask the coaching staff. After 25 years this spring, I asked the coaching staff if I could have access to the field during batting practice, because that's where I get the most done in what I do with baseball clubs, is standing around at batting practice right by the cage. I can see everybody who cycles in and out of that cage. Being in the right place at the right time is really, really important. So think about that related to practices. How can you be as close as possible so as to serve, but not so much that you're in the way, where they're going to go, wait, why is he here? This guy's in the way. This is a problem. Find a way to be at practice as close as you can be without being in the way is kind of the rule of thumb. If that is sitting in the seats, take your spot, sit in the seats. Understand that's what I have today. I had that for 25 years with baseball. I stood right by the edge of the dugout so I could hear what's going on in there. I could talk with the coach between innings or whatever. But I'm going to stay out of the way because I haven't been invited in. We're always an invited guest, and that serves our purposes. As we are invited further in, there's more responsibility comes with each step being invited in. So be careful of those things. About being at practice is very important. While you're there, observe, watch, listen, pay attention to what's going on, and perceive. Try to understand, watch the relationships that are developing between players, between coaches and players, between coaches and coaches. Watch all those things. How do these players, how do those coaches treat the support staff? How do they deal with the athletic trainers, with the equipment people? Do they take haughty attitudes, or are they congenial? Do they work well together? Is there cohesion? Try to observe and perceive everything that you can about those people, because all of those relationships are the stuff with which we work. Our stock in trade is relationships, how we talk with them. So I'd love to have you think about where to be, where not to be related to practice. Again, the rule of thumb, be as close as you can be so as to hear, perceive, observe, all that stuff, but not be in the way. I think those are very important. You got to figure that out culture by culture within sports. It's different with a soccer team. It's really, really hard, frankly, with track and field and with swimming and diving and things like that, where there's lots of individual movement going on, but very seldom is there a whole cohesive, one group all together kind of thing. It's really more difficult, and you have to figure that out on the fly usually. But the relationship with the coaching staff will help you figure out how to do that. Ask them good questions, learn what you can, and then see where those most practical moments are, most advantageous to your work. Let's talk a bit about game day. How to serve well on game day. Depending on where you are on game day, this happens to be a football stadium where we are, If I'm up here in this section of seats, I'm somewhat limited in what I can do on game day as opposed to if I'm down here on the sideline on game day. I'm very privileged in that I've been able to be on the sideline for football for a long, long time, but there are still some things I learned in my first year way up here in the seats that I could do. Again, it comes down to observe and perceive. Instead of just watching the game on the field, I'll watch some of that, but I'm not watching the ball as much as I am watching individuals that I know, and I'm watching how they relate to each other. I'm watching how they play, and then I'm watching this area a lot, this sideline, the box where the players and coaches are. Because again, I'm observing and perceiving what's going on in those relationships now under a supercharged, intense atmosphere. How do they relate to each other? How do they speak to each other? How do they work with each other? How do they deal with, again, the support staff? You can observe some of that stuff from way up here if you happen to be sitting up there. So I'm watching the sideline as much as I am the game itself if I'm relegated up here. But however, if I get option to be on the sideline, to be walking among them, now I can hear a lot more. I can see a lot more closely. I can read facial expressions and a lot of things like that more closely and can relate to them and even speak to them down there. That's the cool thing, is now I can talk to them. I can whisper in ear holes. I can talk with players as the process is going along. That's going to vary from sport to sport. I have never been allowed in a baseball dugout, probably won't. They're working, they're doing their job, and that is inner sanctum for those folks. But on game day footballs, there's tons of people there. So there are opportunities there. Basketball, not asked to sit on the bench. I'm sitting way up in the seats, but I'm still observing and perceiving. I'm watching more intently what's going on during a timeout on a basketball floor than I am even the game. I'm watching to see how are these coaches and how are these people relating to each other. All that stuff informs how I speak to them at practices, how I speak to them if I get the chance to do a talk or a Bible study. All these things that we observe and perceive on game day and at practices matter. A couple other thoughts related to game days. If I'm given the immense privilege to travel with a team, take it. It lets you into a more relaxed atmosphere to be with them in some places like the hotel, on the bus, things like that, over dinner. You can relax and build relationships more deeply in a relaxed atmosphere like that. So take opportunities as you have. Sometimes you're just riding a bus and there are idle hours, or you're flying on a plane or whatever it is, but there's idle time to read, to study, to prepare, to think. But when you're in group settings with the team, pay attention to how they work together. Watch for all those relational dynamics that are going on around them, because that again, it informs how we speak to them, what we talk about when we get to do our chapel or we get to do a Bible study. All these things may put right on the table the issues we need to talk about. They may be that this thing, my observation here, points me to a scripture that then I unveil, and bang, we're informing their life in sport from the scripture, and it speaks volumes right to their hearts. I would have you think about, lastly, learn the sporting culture as you can. Each one of them is a little different, even between men's and women's basketball, men's and women's soccer, track and field, all those things. They're going to be slightly different based on their gender, as well as how the coach shapes his or her culture. The programs with which they've coached before, are they more like Dean Smith kind of coaches, or are they more like John Wooden kind of coaches? Are they Rick Pitino guys, or are they Bobby Knight guys, or who is it they follow? How do they study? How do they go about the game? You can learn that, and you can shape your service to fit the culture that you're serving. Lastly, how do you get the invitation for any of these things? Well, some of them you just go ask. If you're in an initial meeting with a coach and you're saying, Coach, I'd love to serve you and your staff and your team, do as much or as little as you think is proper. What would you like, Coach? And if he or she doesn't even know, you can start offering things. But then, okay, Coach, if I'm going to serve your team, I need to know where the right places to be are. It's of great value to me to be at practice. Would that be okay? Yeah, and so, Coach, what's the best time at practice for me to learn the most about your team? Have limited time. What's the best 30 minutes to be at practice? He or she can tell you. It's either in the morning, or at the beginning of practice, or it's at the end of practice. Sometimes it's in the middle. Find out what that is, and you may have to learn that by observation, but they may tell you. I'm going to tell the team exactly what I'm about today. And I do that at the beginning of practice. Many football coaches do that at the end of practice. A lot of times they don't do that at all, but you have to figure out what's the best time to be at practice. That'll shape differently by culture, sport by sport, team to team, coach to coach. It just takes building the relationship to learn that. It will take time. That invitation comes because they trust you. If something has them holding back a bit, it's because you haven't won the trust yet. The more you develop a relationship, the more they will trust you and the more entrance you will have. 25 years in, 26 years in with football, I've got a lot of trust, and I keep accumulating jobs with the team because they trust me to come through for them. I would encourage you to do the same. Invest your heart in the people, and you will find invitations that you could have only dreamt about a couple of seasons ago as they come to you. As your trust grows, your relationship grows deeper, then's when the opportunities to do great ministry occur. Invest yourself, be present, and you will serve the Lord exceedingly well. Thanks.